And joining me now is the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. We're 5 or 6 days away from a potential shutdown, so we got to start with that topic first. Good to see you, sir.
Good morning. That was a lot of fun.
I have a feeling you're going to enjoy watching the Democratic primary play out. But let's start with the near term here. Seems to be cautious optimism that a deal is at hand. You had this Camp David meeting, I believe, on Friday with some congressional leaders. How close are we to a deal? And is the president going to support something that is less than what he asked for?
Two different questions. Let's talk first about how close we are to a deal. I honestly don't know because it depends on who you listen to. In fact, I think what we're seeing now in these negotiations, and again, the White House, at the request of all the parties on the Hill, has sort of stepped back. We're still participating, we're still listening, we're still talking, but we're not leading the negotiations. We're sitting there and watching what's happening, and what we hear is just as varied as what you just played out. Okay. It sort of depends on who you talk to. I've heard that there may be a deal with as much as $2.1 or $2.5 billion for a border fence. Then I hear that there may be zero or as little as $800 million for the border fence. There's one Democrat who apparently wants to not only reduce the spending this year, but go back and take money away from previous years that hasn't been spent yet. So it's all over the map, and I think it's all over the map because of the Democrats and all over the map because of what you just played on the introduction to this segment.
$2 billion is the number we keep hearing for, though, this additional money. He wanted the 5.7. 2 seems to be the number that everybody's circling. Is that an acceptable number?
This is how the president looks at it. And agree or disagree with him, you may agree, you may disagree. Folks watching this may have different opinions about it. But the president really does believe that there is a national security crisis and a humanitarian crisis at the border, and he will do something about it. So whether or not he gets $1.6 billion from Congress, whether or not he gets 2.5 or 5.7, he's going to do whatever he legally can to secure that border. So you have to look at this, I think, Chuck, in terms of the larger agreement regarding what we're going to do on the southern border.
So is it fair to say whatever Congress hands him, he'll sign? He just may not be enthusiastic about it.
No, I don't think so.
You're not ready to go there.
No,
we cannot definitively rule out a government shutdown at the end of this week.
You absolutely cannot, and here's why.
Okay.
Let's say, for sake of this discussion, that the Democrats prevail and the hardcore left-wing Democrats prevail. There was a Democrat congresswoman who put out a tweet yesterday about $0 for DHS. So let's say that the hardcore left wing of the Democrat Party prevails in this negotiation, and they put a bill on the president's desk with, say, zero money for the wall, or $800 million, some absurdly low number. How does he sign that? He cannot in good faith sign that. It takes a presidential signature for the spending bill to become law.
But can you imagine Senate Republicans would go along with a proposal like that? Are you that skeptical of Senate Republicans?
I don't think so, but you asked me a question. Is a shutdown entirely off the table? The answer is no.
So, but $2 billion, you sit here with this loose compromise that we see, and supposedly you guys are coming to an agreement tomorrow. Because in order to get it passed by the end of the week. Is that still the loose deadline?
I've been told it's today. I was at Camp David with a couple of conference members on Friday night, and they were told to be in town today to get ready to sign a conference report.
But is it likely that if the president signs it, he's going to say, yes, but? Is that the best way? Because you just said no matter whatever he's short of, is he going to find the money somewhere else? Is that what we should expect?
I think that's fair. That's probably the most likely outcome. Again, you cannot take a shutdown off the table, and you cannot take 5.7 off the table. But if you end up someplace in the middle, then what you probably see is the president say, okay, and then I'll go find the money someplace else.
You've been looking for the money in the budget.
I have been.
There's this national emergency. Are the two the same or different? Do you find money without declaring a national emergency, or do you need to declare the national emergency to use this other money?
The answer to the question is both. There are certain sums of money that are available to the president, to any president, and I think that bears sort of more detail, Chuck. What we're trying to do, what we're looking at doing with President Trump is stuff that is entirely legal, stuff that is laid out in law already. So the question is not, okay, the president didn't get what he wants, so he's just going to go do what he wants without Congress. The law doesn't allow him to do that. So you comb through the law at the president's request. You and I have talked before about his request to go find money in any place that we could, and we've done that. And there's pots of money where all presidents have access to without a national emergency, and there's ones that he will not have access to without that declaration.
You're not sounding optimistic about this. It does sound, just be honest, I'm taken away here like, Are you counseling him not to take this deal?
How can you be optimistic about a compromise when the opposition party is as fractured as you just showed on your introduction? Where is the center of gravity in the Democrat
Party? Does
Party?
that matter if the compromise comes up and it's $2 billion? I mean, if that's the compromise, that's the compromise.
Yeah, I mean, we'll judge the deal by the deal itself, but you asked me about optimism versus pessimism. What do the Democrats stand for when it comes to southern border security? We've had a couple of folks say that walls are immoral. We've had other folks say that they know that walls work. So where are the Democrats in this? Republicans, for a rare circumstance since I've been in Washington, are sort of all on the same page, which is we do need more of that. So my lack of optimism comes from maybe my experience in this town.
Fair enough. Let me shift to Saudi Arabia. On Friday, there was a deadline for the administration to provide a report on the death of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi that took place inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. We have reporting indicating that the administration did not meet this deadline. Why hasn't that happened, or did you meet a deadline and we don't know it yet?
I honestly don't know, and have not been familiar and worked into those negotiations. I do know that there are some requirements placed upon us by Congress, but I'm not aware of the status of that report.
None at all. You're not prepared to answer whether the president believes the Saudi government was behind the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi?
No, I think the better person, I can't remember, I think it's the State Department that's supposed to do that. You'd have to ask Secretary Pompeo.
All right, because I want to ask you about one thing that the Saudi foreign minister posted on Twitter. It was a rather threatening poster. Take a look at it. It was something else here, and this was from Adil. I know you're very familiar with him. Our leadership is a red line, and if you take a look at what it says there in the bottom, we warn against any attempt to link Khashoggi's crime to our leadership. The United States Congress has basically done that. The American intelligence community has basically done that. That is a threat to the United States?
I don't know what that is. It's the first time I've seen that. So, look, I know that Congress is looking into it. I know the State Department is looking into it. And beyond that, Chuck, it has not come to my desk yet.
You know about this Jeff Bezos story. He has implicated the National Enquirer and its owner, Mr. David Pecker, in some form of a blackmail or extortion scheme. Can you say definitively that the President of the United States knows nothing about David Pecker's reporting on Jeff Bezos?
You and I were talking about before the show about how I can function at my job and you struggle with your function because I can compartmentalize and you can't.
Right.
I have not had 1 second's worth of conversation with the President of the United States about the Jeff Bezos situation.
Not a single at all.
We run the government,
I
Chuck.
understand that.
We make
he
sure
spends, I guess this leads me to my question. There's a report that the President spends a majority of his time in executive time.
Yeah.
So could it be that this is why you're not aware of this, that he's off tweeting away and gossiping and not working?
No, I read that, and I get those schedules. In fact, that's probably the closest thing to a public schedule that we put out. It's not very sensitive. I think 400 people get that schedule, so it wasn't that valuable of information.
Then why is there a leak hunt?
But it's very, well, come back to answer your question about executive time, because and you and I have had this conversation, I think, before, which is this show lasts an hour. Does that mean you only work for an hour a week? No, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in order to make this happen. That executive time is on there to allow the President to prep for the next meeting, to debrief from the previous meeting. The phone calls start at 6:30 in the morning and they go until 11 o'clock at night. So I can assure you that the gentleman is working more than what's on that calendar.
When we booked you, we asked, how do we identify you? White House Chief of Staff or acting White House Chief of Staff? We were still told acting.
Yeah, Mick would.
Is that going to change?
We're all just.
Will the acting ever be dropped?
Honestly, I don't care. I don't think anybody else pays attention to it outside of the West Wing.
Do you plan to serve the rest of this calendar year?
Yes.
Well, there you go.
I plan to serve as long as the President wants me to serve, which is what everybody in the cabinet does. Everybody in the West Wing does. These are all temporary jobs in the first place. They're all acting in some sense. I will stay as long as he feels like I'm doing good value, and I will stay as long as I feel like I'm contributing, and that is happening right now.
Commerce Secretary, a real thing?
No, that was a discussion we had back in, I think, in the fall before this position. So no, I've also heard that I turned down several millions of dollars to be the president of the University of South Carolina, which is also false. No, these are the things that the parlor games that get played in Washington.
Yes, they do. Mick Mulvaney, the acting White House Chief of Staff. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks
for coming on. Appreciate it.